Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'll show you how I made this two-piece dress in yellow linen. I start off by drafting my pattern. The bodice will be inspired by Victorian dress patterns and I start off by drawing my base pattern and adjusting it. I find pattern drafting very interesting and I like to figure out how this and that line affects the fit of a garment, but I know by the statistics that most of you don't, so we'll breeze through this one. And here is the fabric I'll be using. It's a lovely ochre yellow linen. I'm describing the color with words because it looks different in every single shot of this video. I lay the fabric double and proceed to cut out the bodice in an uncharacteristically wasteful way, remembering to add allowance for a button stand at the last second. Oh thanks, there's reason to the madness it seems. Then past me is pinning and stitching the centre back. This was done on my machine and will be done as a French seam. Then past me decided to start ironing the front closure. I made this bodice in between the many shirts I made this summer. That's why I'm able to freehand the folding and actually get the measurements right. That or they misplaced their thermometer again. Then I put the bodice on my mannequin in order to get the shoulder seams to lay properly. Past me is also pinning the dots. I say I much prefer drafting to draping, but I ended up relying more on draping than drafting for this. Then past me started on the hour-long process of aligning and repinning the dots. Oh, if only they had a pattern to follow instead. The dots were sewn and adjusted further until I was happy with the fit. I once again used French seams for the shoulder seams, and apparently we had an accident doing that. Fixing this definitely didn't help with the fit, but at least it was easy to fix. I filmed this in June, and I fully intended to finish the top and skirt in 2 days. We were experiencing a heat wave at the time, so I didn't bother with sleeves. So the next step was to trim away part of the unnecessary seam allowance. Then I sewed an overlock stitch over all the raw edges. This was completely unnecessary, but I thought it would make it easier to turn. Then I turned the seam allowance over twice and stitched it using a whip stitch. This was done with all the remaining seams. I didn't like how the shoulders looked. I think they curved a bit too much. To fix this, I simply tacked it down with a prick stitch. I love this stitch. It's simple and it adds this intentional vintage sloppiness to garments. I wanted the front to be closed with hooks and eyes. I marked the placement with my seamometer and stitched them down using a buttonhole twist. The bodice was finished, but it would take me another month before I continued with the skirt. But before that, I cut out the sleeves so I knew how much fabric was left. You see, I usually don't plan out everything in advance. I mean, what's the fun in that? Anyway, these sleeves were a choice. Finally, it's time for the skirt. Humming Christmas songs in August. The remaining length of fabric was measured and divided to give me the length of the skirt. Anyone wanna bet which number I got? I marked the halfway point and squared off the fabric. Here I'm using the same method for creating panels as I always do, so I'm not going to try to explain it poorly. Watch the tutorial if you haven't. The only thing I would like to add is that certain fabrics stretch, so you might want to give yourself a smaller waist measurement similarly to what you would do when making a circle skirt. And you might want to let the skirt hang for a few days before you finish the hem. This fabric has a bit of stretch to it for whatever reason, and this was the first time I experienced the hem stretching with this pattern. And this is what the finished pieces look like.
Okay, so these are all the skirt pieces cut out, and as you can see, it's almost a circle skirt, which, good on us, it's gonna be nice. Since this is the edge and it's not going to fray, I'm just gonna stitch them together with the right seam allowances, which for me is 1.5 centimeter. And then on these raw edges, I am going to sew them up with French seams, as I usually do. And then we're gonna even the waist, the hem.
And then we did just that. Starting with the assembly of the skirt panels. Before sewing the final side seam, I decided on my closure, and as it turned out, I had this perfectly matching yellow zipper in my stash. Not that you would know which yellow that would be, since it still looks different in every shot. I stitched the side seam closed, but when I get to the pin marking my zipper, I backstitch and switch to the longest stitch length on my machine to sew the rest. The zipper is stitched on by hand with a prick stitch. Since this is on the straight of grain, I can use the threads of my fabric as a guide for where to sew. Then I can remove the machine stitching and reveal the almost perfect zipper. It's been a while since I messed up, so it's time to even the waist. You really should do this step before you hand stitch your zipper, which was the reason I didn't want to reinsert it. And you thought I'd forgotten about the waistband. Yes, I had. But past me didn't and saved me some fabric. So here, past me made a little yellow waistband for our little yellow skirt. I sew the outside down on my machine and finishes the inside by hand with whip stitches. I had run out of my grandma's hooks and eyes, so I opted for a snap button. Then the hem. Yeah. I've never used this hem tool on the mannequin, and frankly it's only ever been in the way, but here it was almost useful. And left are only ribbons and dresses for mice. Last time I did this backward stitch for a hem, I asked if anyone knew what it was, since I completely made it up at the time, and I got a lovely comment telling me several names for it, among them a cat stitch. So now I'm convinced that every single little stitch you make have a name, and thus you can never hand stitch wrongly. Now only the daunting sleeves are left of this project. I start by pinning and sewing the funky darts before closing the sleeve with a French seam.
Okay, so I've come to the point where I've finished this seam and I've realized that this seam is in the wrong place because these two are supposed to switch places, so the sleeve itself is mirrored because I followed the pattern correctly, I think. Tell me if I didn't. This pattern is made for a checkered print, so I'm wondering if this is done intentionally just to try and hide away all the mismatching, because these darts are here in this way to match the fabric better, to make it easier for you to match the fabric instead of just having a seam there as well. So I thought it just would be easier to make it. I'm just gonna stick with it being the reason.
I was not aware they followed a pattern. The things you learn about yourself. Similarly to the bodice, I fold over and stitch the raw edges on the sleeve with a whip stitch. Then I baste it onto the bodice.
And here we have it. So this is what it looks like this far. And I'm sort of happy with what it looks like. I had to take these sleeves in several times and then let them back out. And at this point, they look nice and fitted when I stand properly. There's a bit of bulk here and there and whatnot, but if I do anything about it, I won't be able to move. Because at this point, buttoning the top button is, well, the hook, is already kind of difficult. And I mean, I would like to be able to lift my arms in this, which at this point I can. I wouldn't recommend it. And I think it ended up looking okay. Like, this entire top is very tight fitted. I want it to look tight fitting. The one thing I wish I had done, instead of cutting these on a straighter grain, they're on a straighter grain right now, if I'd cut them on the bias, I might have made them stretchy. They might have been a nightmare to sew and to insert, but they would have been stretchy. And this would have been a lot easier because this fabric does have some stretch to it. I think it should have worked. Yeah, and this is a coat, maybe.
Okay, with that rant over, I secured the sleeves to the bodice with something in between a ladder and a whip stitch. If anyone knows the name, this is your moment. And I used this on both the inside and outside to secure it properly. Then I finished the cuff like the rest, fold over twice and stitch down with a whip stitch. It's actually a really difficult word for me to say. Whip stitch with this. Then to add some texture and security, I sewed prick stitches along the button stand. The basting was removed and off camera I redid the neck and made it lower and more agreeable in the front. And that's it for this project. Thank you for following along and good luck with your own adventures. Until next time.
Mm-hmm.